we open with prayer? I need to find the prayer that I was going to do.
I knocked you right off kilter, didn't I?
That's all right. All right. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. May my life be filled with thanksgiving and praise for your countless blessings. Give me assurance that you supply my every need through your generosity. May grace, mercy, and peace be with me and all of us, from God the Father and Christ the Son, in truth and love. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. So my name is Amanda Grumish. I'm just part of the core team. We have 4 of us that run this, and it's fairly simple process. We just kind of do monthly meetings, and we've been doing them from Zoom since we started with COVID back last March. I think we took a couple months off and then tried the Zoom thing, and it's been working pretty well. Because we're based out of a large metro area, not everyone can get to the meetings because of driving. And so the Zoom has allowed us to be able to open it up to even more people throughout our archdiocese. So we're super excited about that. So equally excited to hopefully get back to meeting in person soon. We're going to do a social next month. So we're excited to hopefully be able to meet some of the people that we've only been able to see in a little tiny square box for the last year. And then start kicking off quarterly meetings after that in person. But we're actually going to stick with Zoom meetings the rest of the year, because it does allow that opportunity for people that have trouble getting out of the office, or maybe work part-time, or have a drive. So this is our new format now. So we're excited to have you here. We're hoping on those quarterly meetings to have speakers. And really, it's just, this is a great opportunity for us to share what we do, best practices, what maybe some new ideas that people are going to do for the next season. That's always coming up with Christmas, Easter, things like that. And I don't know, that's what we are. I work for one of the churches that has 3 locations, and a lot of the churches are merged here now. So kind of crazy. We also have a Catholic school, which we have a lot of Catholic schools in our area. It'd be interesting to hear kind of what your area, do the churches work with schools? Do they work separate? Different things like that. And then we don't really have a specific format. Megan, maybe you can help with that. What we were thinking, and Nicole, what we were thinking for today as far as
maybe
the
I could just go. I know you guys had sent Ellen's bio off, so some of you might have a little bit of a background. But yeah, I got to, because one of her business is the PR Academy. She's based out of Ireland, beautiful country. I've never been able to get there. And it's just, as she mentioned for a little bit, for those who were on earlier, she works a lot with crisis communications. However, her academy offers training all across the board on how you brand yourselves, and how you, like your image versus how others see you, and then how you can kind of, just general good marketing practices, good even social media practices. I think you were doing a training on that recently. So lots of expertise that's coming out of there. And she's been generous enough to share those now with our Catholic Media Association, formerly the Catholic Press Association. And so that's kind of how we have connected. But also there's just some valuable insights, not only from communications as a whole, but there's also, I think, just some insights on how, as you started to allude to, Amanda, just how churches and the schools work here, and then maybe how they do in Ireland, kind of get a little more global feeling, like, how church communications works just in different areas. So yeah, maybe just starting a little bit from the beginning, maybe Ellen, if you want to just give us just a quick couple minutes, a little bit, if there's anything I missed, and kind of giving an overview of your work. And if you had a certain presentation, if you wanted to, you could certainly go into that. Otherwise, we could certainly go into Q&A. I could shoot a few questions your way. And if you have any questions for us, we as people across the board at different parishes, and even I think a different Catholic organization here as well. So maybe folks can just kind of chime in with your own experiences.
Obvious. Well, I actually did. I was sort of put on notice that a presentation might be an idea. Nicole has this way of sort of auto-suggesting something that says, don't turn up without a presentation. presentation. So if you can make a co-host or whatever, that's okay. And I'll see, I'm useless with technology.
I think Megan can do it.
Okay, I'm the host there now. That's cool. So if I can share my screen. And the last time I tried to do this, I made a shocking horse's doofers of it. So we'll see what happens. Can you, oh, you can actually see that, can you? Oh yeah, I'm going to party this evening. Okay, so very broadly, I think Nicole covered just about everything you need to know about me. I'm Ellen Gunning. I'm for well on 40 years now. I got involved in PR originally because I was actually working at a building company, but I was desperately bored doing the work that I was doing. And I started getting really involved in the community. So I got involved in things like the Society of St. Vincent de Paul, which is a charitable organization. I got involved in Antashka, which is an environmental group for preserving the built environment. I got involved with the summer project for young people, with Active Age Week for old folks. I just loved it. And out of that, I decided, well, really not enough people know all the things that we're doing for these different organizations. So I found myself being appointed as public relations person, and then decided I hadn't a clue what a PRO was. Well, I should probably study it because it's a really interesting area. And once I got studying it, I just got hooked. I just had to change career. Because I found I loved it. I really enjoyed trying to take a message, craft it, and have it understood, or look at a message that was wrong and see how can I change people's perception or change their belief. So that's effectively how I got into it. I've been in PR. I formed my own consultancy. Oh God, I know, about 1979, I think. And I've been practicing public relations ever since. I used to do everything. I used to do corporate and political and charity, primarily is the three sectors. And the one that seems to have stayed with me longest is the charitable sector. And I now do crisis. I've done a lot of crisis over the years. I really do enjoy it. I find it very challenging. And the more time goes on, the tighter that bubble becomes that you need to respond. Less time you have to actually reach a very broad range of people. And that's my idea of fun. But it's actually hard to explain that to clients. Don't see it in the same way. Mm-hmm. I thought what I'd look at today, right, and I hope this makes a bit of sense. Will that actually move for me? It won't move. Look, I was doing so well. It won't budge. Oh, it did. What I wanted to I thought it is in 2021 because PR has changed so much lately. And I suppose one of the things is the speed of patience. The news is now instant. You don't have any time. Somebody picks up their phone and shoots a piece of video and it's gone viral before you know what's happened. And you're automatically on the back foot because once the news is out there, you're then trying to answer his agenda. Even if there's no agenda, the photograph, the visual has been seen and people believe what they see. They believe what they see without even questioning it. It's one of the things that really annoys me, that years ago you would look at something and say, I wonder, is that actually true? I wonder who took that photograph or where did it come from? Now everybody says, did you see it? Like you're an idiot if you haven't seen it, but then if you saw it, you know what's happening. There was a very interesting one. A few years ago, I was in Estonia, and we were actually appointing an agency. I was over addressing a conference, but we were appointed to handle our advertising in the Baltic region at the same time. And everywhere I went, I kept seeing this photograph of Diana, the Princess of Wales. You've seen them, so you're very familiar with Diana. And everywhere I went, she was like this. And I thought, she never did that, never. I mean, I was around when Diana was around. I kept an eye on everything she did. She never flicked the finger at anybody, didn't happen. So when I eventually, and just by pure chance, and it's in Estonian, so I can't read the text, I don't know what it's about. I kept forgetting to say to somebody, what the, it was everywhere. So I arrive on the Friday morning, I'm up in the elevator, I come out into this really good office, and here's the photograph of Diana in front of me. And the guy met me and he said, hi, how are you? And I said, don't say another word. Are you responsible for this campaign? And he said, yeah. I said, Diana never flicked her finger at anybody. So explain to me, this is obviously the dead can't sue, because you can sue if you're alive and somebody takes your good name. Certainly in Ireland, if you're dead, they can say anything about you. And your estate, your relatives, nobody has a right to sue you. And I said to him, I presume this is because the dead can't sue. And he said, no. And I said, okay, you need to explain it to me. What is it? And he said, it's a photographic exhibition. Photographs. And he said, no, all of the people in the photographs are lookalikes. It's about fake news. And I could not tell the difference. And I actually went to see the exhibition the next morning, and you didn't need to read it, just looked at, now it was some of it was actually quite crude. Some of it was sort of quite witty. So you had what was supposed to be a long lens photograph of Queen Elizabeth of England putting her rubber gloves on to wash a mug before she went to bed. And you thought, okay, it's witty, but everything about it screamed fake news. When you saw the entire series, when you saw one photograph, and I multiple times, what is that? And everybody instantly said, oh, that's her flicking the finger at the royal family, because they were so cruel to her. That's her flicking the finger at paparazzi. Rarely did anybody say, is that actually her? Did she do that? Is that fake? Speed of communication, you're answering immediately somebody else's agenda or somebody else's interpretation. And that's really difficult. The multiplicity of platforms, really difficult to keep track of what's happening across all of the platforms. So if something is happening on Facebook and something else is happening on Instagram and something else is happening on Twitter, it's on TikTok. How do you keep track of it? And people have different personas in different places. And it's actually quite interesting to watch. I had at a presentation that I gave pre-COVID, so it's like 2 years ago. And he stood up after the presentation and said, talking about the platforms for business people, but I use TikTok a lot. And I said, for business? And he said, well, I'm an Indian and I'm into all this Indian dance. And I said, yeah, I get that, but what's your business? And he said, I'm an insurance broker. And I said, okay, that's different. So you get business from TikTok by doing Indian dancing. And he said, well, I have a website and it's the insurance broker on TikTok. And I think I should marry the two because I get business on TikTok from people. And I said, okay, I can guarantee you, if you put your TikTok to your website, people will run for the hills. You won't have a business in 3 days because insurance is dull and boring and sensible. And you mind, but I'm not giving it to somebody who has a whit of an ounce of a personality and likes to do these wacky kind of, I'm not putting my money. And insure about money, it's a sensible, solid. So the people who get your personality are fine. They're happy to invest with you, but keep the two separate. From your point of view, you're looking at somebody who's posting and you don't know how many personas they have. And actually, in a lot of cases, you don't even know of the person. And you've also got the challenge of anonymity. You've got these keyboard warriors. I don't know when people decided to become so horrible, but they seem to be, they now feel that they're entitled to comment on, and they comment on it because nobody knows who they are. So they post anonymously and they say all kinds of things. There's a movie, and I can't remember what it was. I can't remember what it was called, but it was a young couple, and the story was the guy had offended in some way. But basically, people voted on their phones. It was one of these futuristic things with future society. If somebody had offended against the rules, then you voted. Everybody had a vote to say, should they die? And this chap was in the middle of this stadium. We're trying to protect him. He's in the middle of the stadium. And somebody said, okay, so now it is time to vote. Do we kill him or not? And it was a sport. And a message came up on their phones and it said, just before you vote, we are removing the shield of anonymity. So please be aware that when you vote, everybody will know how you vote. And in the movie, everybody looked at it and went, ooh, right. Put the phone back in their pockets and walked away. And I thought, wow, it's modern living. People will say anything about you, to you, for you, when they don't have to identify themselves. But they won't if you make them public. And you don't know who they are. But they're still massively affecting you. And it's a huge issue. Got a growth in print media, which nobody would have anticipated. Print media has been losing readers for the last years, maybe. And suddenly with COVID, print media has become popular again. Now, there's a great debate about whether or not it's going to continue popular, because if COVID suddenly disappears in 3 years' time, will people still have that crucial need to read some just old-fashioned news, But old-fashioned news is journalists who are trained, don't propagandize, won't give you fake news, and will give you the true story that you can abide by. There's a great need for people, there's a hunger for people to find out what on earth is reliable. Who can I believe? There's too much information floating out there around. My personal feeling is that once sorted in some manner, shape or form, print media will start to decline again. We won't actually go out and start buying newspapers. We'll go back to read online, and it may be media online. And the interesting thing with media online, there's a company in Ireland called the journal.ie. It's a newspaper, it's online, fabulous, very well resourced. And I interviewed their managing editor about a year and a half radio show. I have a radio show on Dublin City FM each week as well. And it's all about public relations, journalism, event management, because I'm a junkie in this area. I just love all this stuff. And it's also great, by the way, it's a great way to get anybody to talk to you. You ring somebody up and you say, hello, I'm Ellen Gunning. I'd love to know what you're doing in that parish with, I don't know, how did you handle that crisis? And you'll get a, who the hell are you? And why should I talk to you? You don't have a busy life, go away. But you ring up and you say, hello, I'm Ellen Gunning. I present the Mediascope program on 103.2 Dublin City FM. We have a quarter of it, and I'm wondering if you talk about how you handle that campaign. And they go, when do you want me? It's a totally different thing. But the growth in radio and podcasting has been the same, because people actually want to listen to somebody that they trust, or somebody who can ask the questions. Interview done with a British politician whose name escapes me a couple of months back, and she was talking about the NHS, the health service, and that it's a disgrace and all of these, and she was very badly prepped. She was one of those people who believed that what you need soundbite and just keep using it over and over again, as if the rest of us are all monkeys and we won't ask beyond the soundbite. But she kept saying that all of these companies are making fortunes out of the NHS. And this is our tax money, and it's completely wrong. And the interviewer said to her, so how much is a fortune then? And she said, it's an awful lot of money. It's really an awful lot of money. And what happens is, and he said, so how much? And it was wonderful car crash radio. And she said, well, you take into account, I mean, the number of companies. He said, it's a really simple question. You said private companies are making a fortune from the NHS. How much? Put a figure on it. Are we talking millions? Are we talking billions? How much money are we talking? And after about 5 or 10 minutes, he probably 3 or 4 more questions, he said to her, so you just don't know, do you? I thought, beautiful. She has absolutely no credibility left. Didn't matter what she was going to say after that. She was a muppet. She was written off, she was destroyed. And I suppose one of the big challenges on the other trained people to do radio and television, and one of the big challenges with radio, I had a client at one stage and I said to her, like, you've been invited on to Morning Ireland. Morning Ireland is the most popular, most listened to radio show in the country. And she said, oh, fantastic. And I said, I turned it down. I told them that you were not under any circumstances to go on to Morning Ireland. And she said, and it's very hard to say to somebody. And she said, look, do you know how many people listen to it? And I said, look, they'll eat you alive. You're just not Morning Ireland material. I listen to the blood sport on radio. And there, you know the way politicians love, they thrive on this blood sport? It's like, come on, ask me the questions. I don't care. It's back. And they're gone and they hardly think about it again. She was a quiet, unassuming kind of woman who had, with the greatest respect to her, surface level understanding of things, but you couldn't dig deep because she couldn't really argue the case. And she had a great reputation. And I spent ages trying to explain to her that she would just destroy her own reputation if she did that show, because they would make mincemeat of her. Similarly with television, trying to actually prep people for television. The biggest danger with television is that people judge what they see without the sound even being on. So you're prepping somebody to go onto television and you're saying, this is how you must look. I handled a crisis last year and it was very interesting actually. He was a chief executive of a charity. The crisis exploded and it was a woman. And normally I would be dealing with men, but this was a woman. And I rang her and said, okay, so what we need to do is we need to get you, who's looking for you? And she said, the media are now looking, I've got this long list. And I said, that's fine, I'll ring them all back. And one of the groups that I rang was the 6 o'clock nightly news on RTE1. So biggest viewership of nightly news. I didn't know the researcher. And I said to her, so as an item of interest, would you take the chief executive for an interview if she was available? And she said, I was under the clear impression that she isn't available. I said, I know, but I'm a flibbery gibbet. If I could make her available. would you talk to her? And she said, let me check. And she came back about 5 minutes later and said, yes, we definitely talked to her. We won't do an interview with her in the studio. We'll do a piece outside studio, a piece to camera, and we'll get somebody else to comment. And I said, that's fine. So I rang her back and said, okay, we've got that 6 o'clock news. You're doing it. And she said, no, I'm not. You said I wasn't doing television interviews. So you're doing this one because the other side haven't spoken yet. So you set the agenda and then they have to follow. So I said, a couple of quick questions. When did you last have your hair done? And she said, I don't really think that's very important. I said, it's crucial. When did you last have your hair done? And she said, in a hairdresser's. And I said, yeah. And she said, I don't go to a hairdresser. I said, okay, when you put the phone down for me, you're going to find a local hairdresser. You're going to go in and get your hair washed and dried. And she said, the people who know me know that I don't get my hair done. I said, that's about 6 people who are watching a program that's watched by 750,000. I don't care. Get your hair done. And she said, okay. And I said, what are you wearing? And she said, oh my God. I suppose you'd like to choose what I should wear. I said, I'd love to. Where do you live? And I'll meet you at your house after you get your hair done. And she said, are you for real? And I said, I'm for real. So she said, fine, okay. Met her, and she actually didn't understand. I was saying to her, like, you're running a business, which is a charity. So you must look like you run a business, but you can't look like you run an expensive business, because then you're making too much money from the charity. And if you look like you don't make enough money to be running a business, they'd be saying, God help her, she's obviously a charity worker. She hasn't a farthing. She hasn't got 2 cents to throw together. So the balance has to be that the visual just looks right and they listen to what you say. So she said, fine, okay. And I booked her in for 2 hours media training. Before she did this, what amounted to, we got it down to a 45-second soundbite. And I had her booked in for 2 hours. And I said to her, you've 2 hours now with Peter. And she said, I don't need 2 hours. And I said, I know you don't, you need 3, but we've only got 2. So you need to work with him for the 2 hours. And after about 10 or 15 minutes, I said to her, you keep looking at your phone. You got to put your phone away and concentrate on what he's doing with you. And she said, I don't think, and I do understand it. She said, I don't think you realize I'm fighting a crisis here. I said, I don't think you realize you won't have a charity to fight if you don't put the damn phone away and get this right at 6 o'clock. And by the time we came out, we had it down to a 45-second soundbite, and it said, this is who we are. This is what we do. This is what went wrong. This is how we're planning to fix it. Nothing to see here, folks, move along. And I said to her, I don't care if they ask you, do you take tea in your sugar? You never deviate. Do you take sugar in your tea? You never deviate from that 45 seconds. For so long as you're on campus, that's your answer to everything. It can't be edited. It can't be cut. And within 24 hours, the story had died. And only because she had taken away the power from the others to set the agenda. And that's a huge amount of crisis nowadays. It's who sets the agenda. Because once you start answering somebody else's agenda, you're in trouble. And often you're better off getting out there with the bad news first. The opposite of that, stop me if I'm talking too long, by the way, but the opposite of that was that we had another crisis. A man, I was called in on a Friday evening. A colleague of mine said to me, would I meet this man that he had a story that was breaking? And I said, fine, okay. And he kept saying, I need you to get a statement out to media. I need you to get a statement out to media. And after a while, I said to him, look, I don't know you from a hole in the ground. So let's go back to base one. And base one is, I need to figure out, will I handle this crisis for you? So you need to convince me that you're a good guy, and you need to tell me what happened. And I need to decide, can I help you? And if I can, how will I help you? That's where we're at right now. So we spent about 3 hours with me questioning him. And by the time we were finished, the only thing I was certain of was that he was a really honest man. You know, just that feeling you get from somebody. It's, I trust this guy. He never embezzled any money. He never did anything that was wrong. And I'd really asked him tons of questions. And the second was that he was absolutely incapable of going before media. He could not focus his brain. You know, the way some people, when they get under pressure, they'll answer, you'll say to them something like, I want a really short answer. So, Nicole, what is your name? And because you're under pressure, this is what always happens. People ask me questions like this. I have to answer them. You go, stop, start again. What is your name? Oh, for God's sake, it's really impossible. So I knew I couldn't let him loose at media. So I said to him, look, there's a gagging order basically in the High Court against this story breaking. I'm keeping you away from media until such time as it breaks. And then when it breaks, we'll see how we handle it. We'll see how I can control you going in front of media. And I actually said to his colleague, I don't know what I'm going to do with them. We're going to have to hit him over the head with a shovel or something. He can't do media. But when he was leaving that evening, I said to him, "When you keep telling me that you need a statement for media," and he said, I keep telling you that. And I said, "That's fine. Give me a list. Who do you want me to issue to?" And he said, "The media." And I said, "I know names, addresses, photo fit pictures. Are they television? Are they radio? Are they newspaper? Who is asking for a comment?" And he said, a friend of his in public relations. It turned out I knew the woman and I didn't have a lot of respect for her, I must admit. I didn't have a lot of respect for her ability. She kept telling him that he needed to write a statement and issue it. And she worked very closely with one of the tabloid newspapers. And I said to him, "You don't. You need to answer any question that you're asked. But right now, we're still trying to figure out everything that did actually happen. And you're not issuing any statement." And the following morning.
I think what's interesting is that, I think we've faced a lot of those crisis things kind of when we were, and some of them still are in different pair situations. But I think looking at kind of your list of what you're chatting about, I think, and maybe other team people here can kind of chime in. I think the hardest thing is competing against all of that media that's there. So we're trying to get the attention of people that are in the parishes that are, we're trying to get families to engage. We're trying to tell them about the importance of their faith, or getting them connected to something that is positive, that is true. Like a hunger for truth is so important. But how do you break through, as you mentioned, the infotainment, and kind of use some of those best practices you're talking about and like just practically apply them to just communicate well, to communicate the best good news in the world well?
It's really difficult because all of the research says that what people like to read about or hear about or see is bad news, not good news. So good news is a much harder sell. Good news is, if you're a cynical journalist, you look and you think, oh, somebody, got smacked by a bus, or somebody drove a bus safely, got those kids to school safely. Where's the story? Oh, the guy got smacked by the bus. Every time. So your real challenge is to try to find, it's not the news of what you do day to day, it's to try to create newsworthy events effectively. So it's a speaker who's speaking on some particular topic that would be of interest. It's a festival that you're having which brings people together. So it's a big Christian festival at the weekend, and actually it's the biggest that's been held in this area in how many years, and it's chipping away and trying to find the angles for how do you get that covered, because good news is much, bad news, as you beat them away from the door. They keep phoning you to say what's happening and give me more comment and give me more comment. Good news is much more difficult because people are less interested in it, and there's much more of it around. So if you think, whether it's that you're saying, like, your good news effectively is that all is well. It's exactly the same, whether it's the church, whether it's a business, whether it's a charity. The good news is we're doing well. We need more help from people. We're spreading the gospel. Where everything is moving in the right direction. It's not news. Journalists will regard that as propaganda. So your difficulty is to find something, and it broadly is, it's like politicians telling you that they're doing such a good job. You sit there and go, yeah, tell me when you screw up, then I'm interested. So what you're trying to do is create an event or an interest. Like if you have a speaker, one of the challenges I reckon with people who are too close to what they do, and I'm not saying you are, but people who are in-house, is that they see everything through quite a small lens. So they assume that if somebody is coming to speak, everybody knows this speaker. So you know who they are, and you know what their topic is going to be, and you have a pretty good idea how they're going to tackle the topic. And that may be true of the people who are actually attending the talk, but it's not true of most of the people who are reading the newspaper. So if you can issue from an angle that says this speaker hasn't spoken in the United States or hasn't spoken in this state in the last 4 years, it's a very popular return. The last time they were here, we sold out in 2 hours. This time we sold out in 20 minutes. She takes a peculiar angle on whatever it is, on attending church every Sunday. Is highly controversial, but your job is to find the controversy. It's a good news story, but it's to find the controversy or the angle in the good news. And then it's also to take that speaker and say, what I would now like to do with you is I'd like to effectively move you around like a chess piece and get you onto all these other radio programs and television programs to talk about who you are, what you do. And the difficulty is very often people who can be good presenters aren't good radio and television interviewees. So it works against you rather than in favor of you. So it's always your call that like they're great, but I really shouldn't put them near television. Because they'll just, like there's one speaker in particular I'm thinking of who's a fantastic presenter, but even when you ask a question, you can feel that you're starting to think, oh, life is too short. I can't live through this because it's a wordy answer. So your challenge always is to find, why would people who don't care be interested? What's the angle and how can I spin it into an angle? And your angle may well be that is something very slight in what they're saying. So if you, I'm trying to think of an example of somebody speaking. If you have somebody who's speaking about the built environment and they're saying that they love the whole Georgian era, except that they believe that the outdoor toilets that were created at that time should be pulled down. And the story you issue is you have a controversial speaker who believes that all of those fantastic pieces of Georgiana should be ripped to shreds. Because you'll get people phoning saying, tell me about this, and they can tell them about everything else as well. But it's a real challenge. I think a huge amount of time goes into deciding what angle you're actually pitching to media.
Well, and even in that case, a lot of times, again, it's not necessarily the media, it's more like person to person, but the angle is right. I mean, you always have to know what, you know, someone's going to answer what's in it for me. But here's a related question that might be interesting, either for you or just anyone else I call. Like, what is the role of communications then in building relationships? Because, you know, that's getting someone to engage, get kind of interested, maybe to read. But what's that next step of using your communication space to build a relationship, whether it's on social media, on your email campaigns, or, you know, because really we're looking at really building and growing community, and hopefully people that are really investing in it and continuing to invest themselves in it, you know? Your
key role as a communicator is to build those relationships. It's to actually get the message out there clearly understood. If you think about communications, it's a two-way street. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to get people to understand your perspective and you're trying to understand theirs. And that's what a communicator does. You're trying to create that engagement so that people agree with you or disagree with you, but they'll engage with you and they'll say, I'm not really sure what you meant about that, or that was a fantastic piece, or I love that prayer that you posted last week. You're getting that engagement with them, and that's your challenge. And you can only do that if you approach that from a strategic perspective. So you literally look at it and say, if you're trying to reach the community who already are, if you're trying to reach the people who are already within your community, then you would look at them and see, how do they divide in terms of age? How do they divide in terms of interest? How do they divide in terms of the media that they access? And you would start to look at, well, those people, I need to get something into the local newspaper a couple of times a year because they're an older profile, they read the paper, or they read the paper that we distribute. So we reach them through that. The younger profile, they don't read newspapers. It doesn't matter that it comes into the house, they'll bin it. So I need to get them on social media. I need to get them on Facebook or TikTok, or I need to get them in an entirely different way. The group in the middle, maybe I need to look at it that they'd like to be more involved and more active, but they're in their 30s or 40s, they've got young children, nowadays they don't, but you used to drive long commutes to work. They're time bubbled, they're pressured for time. So what can I do to give them back some time, or what can I do to help them in some way? And I don't know if it was you, Nicole, or I think it was another lady I spoke to in Pennsylvania who was handling a parish there, and she said what she found fascinating with the COVID lockdown was that they used to have 25 people who came to mass every morning at 10 o'clock. And with the lockdown, she said, just purely because she wasn't skilled, she thought, we need to pre-record the mass, which we can't do it live because, you know, my camera work will screw up and then people will be saying, Father Joe didn't look like himself at all this morning, what were you doing? And I only saw the top of his head. And because she was so nervous, she pre-recorded. She pre-recorded and she got the mass out at 7 o'clock in the evening instead, or 6 o'clock in the evening. And they found that the numbers grew and grew and grew, because what she had pitched it as was a quiet oasis in the middle of your day. So people who had done the long commute, they'd gone to work, they'd commuted back again and just needed that spiritual space. And by pitching it as, this is your 40 minutes to yourself before you then go back to being mom, dad, whoever, carer of your mother. This is you've earned the money, you've done all the job, come back, take 40 minutes, time out, and now go on to, this is you time. But it was actually spiritual time, and it was God time. But it was pitched in a different way, and I thought it was very clever. And she actually reckoned, I asked her how many people did she reckon she got who were completely new. And she said up to 50% of the people she reckoned had never actually crossed the door of the church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and I think we hear stories about that happening a lot during COVID too, that the live stream has really reached, you know, a unique audience. So what's interesting, kind of summing up what I was hearing from that is, it's really about knowing who you're speaking to, knowing the channels they use, and knowing what their needs are, what do they need and when. So the same thing we were saying, if you're pitching something for parents, make it something that's very easy and doesn't take a lot of time or even saves time. You know, if you're doing it for your youth, maybe it's something along the lines of make sure it has purpose, make sure that it has a chance for them to just see like maybe even the meaning or the results right away, or, you know, whatever it happens to be, to getting to just really know and meet those needs, it sounds like.
And the other thing is, depending on which media you use and meeting those needs, you meet it in different time gaps. So if you're dealing with younger people, it's a very short window of, I got the message, I've moved on. Like, they consume media at an awful rate. I can't remember the last statistic I saw, but they basically sit with a thumb on their phone, scrolling all day, every day. I've seen it next. They consume media very fast. You need them to stop for that 1.5 minutes, maybe maximum, to see your piece. So you need to spend a heck of a long time crafting it so that it catches their attention. The quality of what you put out there has to be phenomenal. If, on the other hand, you're dealing with something like print media, you have an opportunity to say, look, I'll go into depth on this. So your 3 minute, if you're taking one story and splicing it, the splice for younger people is maximum 1.5 minutes, probably ideally down to 40 seconds at this stage. And they get it and they've moved on, but they got the message. You managed to communicate it to them. If it's for an older generation or for people who have more time, it's newspaper and you can go through it at your own pace. You can read it, you can enjoy it. If you're looking at people who listen to radio, then which radio program? And who do you choose to go onto that program? So do you send a woman onto a program where the guy always says things about you're looking very pretty today, which is fine if you're the kind of woman who says, I know I am, I'm just gorgeous. But it's entirely wrong if you're going to send somebody who says less of the pretty stuff and get on with the questions. So it's matching your people, because at the end of the day, if the program people listen to is that program, we had a television presenter in Ireland who, the first woman, she's a nuclear scientist, and she was the first woman who created something Irish that became part of one of the Apollo space missions. And when he introduced her, she came out onto the stage and he said, aren't you a great woman? And you to be a nuclear scientist? And she froze, like she was fit to kill him. And I looked at it and thought she was very badly briefed, because the answer was, I know, and you'd never think you were a television presenter. Don't we make a great team? And then he'd have gone on and said to her, so tell us what you've done. And she'd have looked like she kind of flattered him back because he was a bit of an idiot. But she hadn't been well prepped for it. And your job is to do that prepping and find that gap. And similarly with television, if you're doing television pieces, it's who's the right person on television? Have they the right look? There is a look for television. There are people who just don't look right on television. I don't know how you explain it, but you look at them and you think, they look shifty. Like, I wouldn't buy from him. I wouldn't believe him. It's like, would you believe her? I wouldn't believe her. It doesn't matter what she's saying. I don't believe her. And there are people who are just better on radio than on television. And then there are, sorry, I'm going to stop now, but there's also, I spoke with a group a couple of years back, and they had, I can't remember, they were all in wheelchairs, but they had different disabilities that had brought them to a wheelchair state. And there was one lady who had to stop and breathe before she answered you. So she would say something like, you'd say, how are you? She'd say, I'm fine, every time. And I was actually doing radio training with them. And as you probably guessed by now, I'm as straight as a die. So when we came to the end of the training, she said, and I wonder, do you think I'd be good on radio? And I said, no, don't go near it. You'd be a disaster. Nobody listens to you. They'll flick stations. They'll never call you back a second time because nobody can see what's happening. They don't understand. So on radio, there's this silence and you think, what's going on with that idiot? Why haven't I got an answer? But on television, if you can actually see that somebody is struggling for breath, you watch because you understand. So it's also choosing the right people for the right media and the right age profile. If you're talking to young people, anybody over 21 is ancient. So that you've got to be talking to them, but somebody at their age group that they will listen to. Otherwise, it's an old fuddy-duddy. So you have all of those elements in play all the time.
Interesting. Yeah, very cool. So and one of the things I was interested in, I was kind of taking a pause because I was like, the one exception to that is actually at our youth day. A lot of times, like Archbishop will get a really good response, but I would imagine that's more the exception than the norm because, then you have, it's more of a, a known personality or something that's like speaking to them. I did have a question though about the training that I thought was really interesting that you provide. So there's a lot been about marketing, like your image and things like that. And I wonder, for some parishes, I think we have an idea of kind of what our identity is, but then there's a little bit of how do you define that? How do you kind of figure out, what is your identity as a parish and what's the value of kind of maybe even defining that to use in your communications and your marketing to draw people in,
You need to own your space, but you need to be very clear about which space you're owning. And that's a challenge for you as well as for everybody else. So as a parish, what do you actually stand for? So can you, sort of like your, what do they call that, your elevator pitch if you're a business? Give me the elevator, give me 60 seconds of why should I have any time for you at all? Who are you, what do you do? Can you do it? You should be able to do it, and that should actually, you put a lot of time into it, but that should define your areas of key involvement. And I think you need to also define the areas that you don't get involved in, or the areas that you don't comment on. And I don't mean not commenting on something that's very close to you, but something like your schools and your churches are very closely aligned. In theory, they would be in Ireland. In practice, the church wouldn't comment. They'd comment broadly on schools, but they never comment on an individual school. It isn't very, very close like that, and it seems to be much closer in the States. But you may well decide that actually we don't comment on anything to do with the curriculum in schools. Very simple. It's a position you've taken. So we comment on the teaching of our faith in schools, but we don't comment on the curriculum. So you separate out, somebody says, but on the curriculum we teach, I don't know, these personal development skills, and it includes a woman's right to choose. So we want a comment from you on that. And you actually have to know, is that something you comment on, or is it something that you say, no, if you're asking me about what's on the curriculum is decided by the state authorities or whatever, and we don't get involved in the curriculum. What we teach is what we believe in, and we teach it in our faith-based classes or whatever. But you need to know exactly where you're coming from. Or you need to decide if it's any of those areas, then we will comment on it. And if you do comment on it, then you've got to get out early. So as soon as it appears on the curriculum, you've got to come out and say, I just want to raise a red flag here. Because as a Catholic, I find it appalling that this made its way onto the state curriculum. Who the heck approved of this? Who elects these people who decide? But you must be consistent. And that needs somebody, it needs a decision on what you will and won't comment on, because you can't comment on everything, because then you become just one of those go-to people who always has a quote, but nobody actually thinks you have a real opinion that's worth listening to. So that you have to have things that you don't comment on in order for people to value the things that you do comment on.
Yeah, that's really good insight. How about for the group here? Are there any questions kind of on what, and sorry, I kind of ended up, I suppose breaking into that slide, but I was seeing where maybe we can make some connections to folks people are doing and in their parishes. And I think some of those insights have been super helpful. So are there any other maybe questions from people who are attending? You can either like put it in the chat, or if your internet signal is okay, you could hop on and ask a few questions of Ellen maybe.
Give me some tough ones. And I'll give you some tough ones back. Fun. Can I ask you a really tough one then? How many of you have actually had your bishop or your key spokesperson media trained? How many of you have said, do you know what? You need to get out there more often. You need to get in front of a camera, and I'm going to train you and put you out in front of it because that's my job.
I have to exclude myself because that's where my boss came from, was TV. But yeah, actually, that sometimes that happens. Is actually Tom will help out and come out to parishes. But yeah, have you any of you guys either done that yourself or have you connected with Tom on that? I'm not sure how often. No, I'm not sure how often TV interviews are really done for parishes.
Not even television or radio. If you have a key spokesperson, if your bishop is the equivalent of the chief executive of the organization, it's one of my pet peeves that the chief executive has to be seen. Somebody has to say, it's my responsibility, it's on my watch, so this is what's happening. But in order to do that, I think you need two things. You need a spokesperson who's very well trained and who can actually brief them in advance, make them confident about going out there and speaking. But you also need them trained. You need them trained so that they, and it has to be from the outside. I've done this with police force in Ireland, and you can't, even if the police know what other police people should be saying in an interview, they'll never listen to them because they're inside. But you bring somebody in from the outside and you say, I wouldn't say it like that. Yeah, you'll come across all wrong. Say it this way, change the wording, phrase it this way, try it again, try it again, try it again. And by the time they actually go public, they're going, yeah, I'm happy now, I'm comfortable, I know what I'm saying, and I know how I'm saying it. And you can bring the shutters down behind them and say, because I think one of your challenges is that you actually need to make your bishops step forward at a press conference and say, this is what the issue is, or this is me dealing with the issue, and then step back. That's fine, because then you can handle everything after that. Your chief executive has made a statement, but actually issuing a statement that isn't, here I am ready to take the questions, never holds as well.
For past,
and it builds a huge respect.
Yeah, a lot of times for the parishes, they wouldn't necessarily talk about like what archbishop or bishop are saying, but you would know, like in your own community, what, like when would your pastor need to speak or something. So I think from that standpoint, if you're talking about from a pastor perspective or thinking of a parish staff perspective, there's the question of how long should we plan for training, like 2 hours, 4 hours prep, 1 hour, like just knowing that people's hours and staffing might be kind of limited. Like what should you invest on the parish level in this?
To prep your pastor to speak for how long? Like to a public meeting? Through media?
Let me see. Yeah, I don't know, Laura, if you're able to come on to kind of chat a little bit about that. Because for context, I'm thinking more for short videos done by father or principal for our own social media, websites, emails. So yeah, so like if you're sending someone out and you're wanting to say, we want you to do a video on this or speak on this, how do you prep them? How long would it take? Sorry, Laura, I saw you for a bit. Do you want to chat a little bit maybe?
You do everything with them.
Oh, yeah.
You do absolutely everything with them. So you say, this is what I want you to say. You go through the entire script. So you rehearse the script, you write every word of it. You're in control of the video. So you know exactly what messages, you're the message people, you craft the message. So you write the script from beginning to end. You get sign off on every word of it because you make sure that they're using words that they would be comfortable with. Some people would say that was gross. Some people would say it was awful. You just need them using the words that they're most comfortable with. You would go through, I would go through in advance, here's exactly how the final piece is going to look. So your piece fits in as part of, I'm going to show the parish, I'm going to show a town hall meeting, I'm going to show you a clip in the middle that says, let me put this in context, but then I'm going to move to show whatever it is that you're talking about, and I'll close the clip with whatever. Your piece will be 2 minutes long. I want it all recorded on camera. I want you to read from an auto cue so that you look like you're looking into the camera all the time. You may be on video for less than 40 seconds, but I want to be able to choose any single piece of that I want. The purpose of the video is this, it's going out to this group. I would do everything with them, and I would rehearse them to within an inch of their lives, because you look at a video and you expect people to be brilliant. And I would actually finish by saying, I know that's exhausting, but did you look at it? You look awesome. You look at, because you see, we all watch television and video all the time, and we assume it comes naturally to people, and it doesn't, but we assume it does. So if they don't perform well on video, we go, would you look at that idiot? And instantly it distracts, and you have a very short window to catch people on.
Mhm. Ellen, are you able
Wow,
to see
your
the chat?
chat. I'm assuming you're keeping an eye on the chat here, Nicole,
I was
because
just
I'm not.
I was just gonna ask, because I can either relay, or if you've been watching it, then that's okay. So I'll wrap up on this one first, and then I'll move into the next question. So
Sure.
Thomas, who is also on here, he had said that for making YouTube content, what he says is he factors in 30 minutes for briefing before filming, then send the script weeks before, and spend a lot of time in post editing. And he also says, "Hi, Ellen. I lived in Wicklow for the last 2 years," if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
In Wicklow. Hello, Thomas. Your camera's off. Give me a look at you. How are you? Nice to meet you. 30 minutes in advance is probably fair if you've sent the script a good while in advance. Your difficulty with sending the script, you really need to know your person, because if you send me anything miles in advance, I will file it away somewhere. I will never look at it. And the day beforehand, I go, God, that couldn't possibly be tomorrow. Who sent me the script? Where is it? I need to go through it. I think it depends. If you get somebody who's done it a couple of times beforehand, it's easier. If you get somebody doing it for the first time, I would literally, I'd baby step walk them through it, because you need them to feel at the end of the process that they've come across so well that they're not afraid to do it again.
Yeah, and Jody says that she's kind of experienced on the flip side of that is that, struggle. She's gotten training herself, but it sounds like you've struggled to have your leaders understand the value of it and give you the time that's needed for it, right?
That's a whole other issue around internal versus external. That if you're internal and you're saying you should do this, then I'm kind of used to you coming up with all these ideas, and it happens in corporates as well as within the church, obviously, where people say, yeah, must do. You bring somebody in from the outside, and I've seen it so many times where an internal person will say to me, I recommended exactly the same fecking thing like 6 months ago, and he wouldn't do it or she wouldn't do it. And I go, I know, but they're paying me to come in from the outside, and I'm God. So if the external person says it, and very often what I would end up doing is I'd end up talking to the internal person and saying, so what are the issues you're having? And how can I make it easier so that by the time I leave, whoever your boss is saying, we should do this more often, even though you've been suggesting it for ages. But, Jody,
I think specifically, even more so, they just don't even see, they feel like interviews happen so rarely that they don't even understand conceptually preparing. So, for example, our executive director took a newspaper interview, and I heard him on the phone. I came out, I said, did you just do an interview? And he said, yeah, I don't think I was supposed to. I said, you say just a minute, let me call you back. And we talk about it. And so after the interview, I explained the power. Then when the print piece came out, I showed him the other churches that messaged better. And I said, we could have been the lead on this story if you would have said, I'll call you back in 10 minutes. I have, this is why you hire me. I have the guts. I have the gift. We could have done this, and you missed the opportunity. So now he sees the value. But then he turns around and says, yeah, but the last time I did an interview was 5 years ago. It won't happen again for 5 years. So how do you overcome that? That's the piece, just do message training and say media. It's just about
I would stick with media, and I would say, look, if I had more confidence in your ability, you'd do media interviews more often. So stop messing around with me. Stop messing around with me. I'm just at the back of my mind, I'm just not confident putting you forward. Because there you go, you lifted up the phone and you answered questions, and all you had to do was say, I'm sorry, you need to talk to Jody and put the phone down.
Well, and to your point too, you don't ever know when that next media opportunity could pop up. If you have a split instant when there's a crisis and it's either a make or a break, and maybe that's part of it too, is just say, you don't know that. We will do all the things that we need to. I mean, and God forbid, we could have just some sort of an incident that happens even in our neighborhood. I mean, think about all the people that surrounded Cup Foods before George Floyd, right? No one in the parishes in that area. I mean, no one would have predicted that I know how big and how broad that would have been. And so to respond in an instant to people that are mad, to hurting, to fearful, you don't have the time to say, let's go check out media training now.
Well, I was actually thinking when Jody was speaking, that we had a client quite a number of years ago who gave an interview like that on the radio, Morning Ireland program. I'm in the car going, oh no, you know, he's coming on radio. I've no prep done, no idea in advance. And I actually rang the company at the time and said, don't even send me the transcript, just play the piece back to me. There was a word he used that I wasn't happy with, one word, and he got about 8 minutes. And I rang him and said, look, you were absolutely brilliant. And I know people were saying you were fantastic. You aced it, and there's nothing to this interview thing, right? Because you're a natural. So he was doing the same thing, and I said to him, yeah, except I just have one problem with it. You mentioned that the workforce, it was involving a workforce in Spain, and you mentioned that the workforce in Spain were mavericks. And I said, oh, it's not a good word to use. You really should have chosen something else. And he said, mavericks. You see, that's the problem with you people in Dublin. You know, you're all stressed, and you live, because he was in the country. So you're all stressed and you operate in a different wavelength, and, you know, chill. I was really good. And I said, you were excellent. Just don't use that word again. It's not a good word. And in fairness to him, he rang me at 10:30 that morning, and he said, okay, I owe you an apology. And I said, okay, I can live with that. What are you apologizing for? And he said, the word maverick. And what happened was the unions came in and said, you cannot call a fellow unionized workforce mavericks. So he got into terrible trouble with his own union people. So I said, that's fine. I get it. Thanks for the call. And then he rang again at 4:30 that day, and he said, this maverick thing. And I said, no, can't grow legs. I mean, what are you doing with it? I really didn't see how it could go wrong. And he said, oh no, it's become really, really dicey now. And I said, fine, why is it dicey? And it turned out that he had been working with the Spanish embassy, and that they had sent 2 people into the Basque area of Spain, which at the time was very volatile. And the Spanish embassy had phoned him like 5 minutes before he rang me to say that the interview was picked up on Spanish radio, and they translated mavericks as banditos. The embassy were now advising him to get those 2 people out of that area. They could no longer guarantee their safety. And I reckon it put us back by 6 weeks, at least, in terms of resolving the issue. And that was one word, because he was comfortable that he was just talking and just explaining. It's not something you can do. Pull a few examples of disaster interviews and just have them there to throw in. But you remember that interview Father Joe did? Wow. And he said such and such, but I wasn't advising him.
Right. Well, if we move on to, my goodness, yeah, thank you for that example. So if we move on to another question, Lisa had actually asked, any tips for interviewing someone? So on the flip side of it, yes,
interviewing someone
or organization.
So interviewing someone, I reckon the skill with interviewing someone is that you do more research than you need, so that you're very sure that the answers that you're getting are real and true. So that you can actually, from a radio point of view, it's like I love interviewing people and I love getting their story, but I also love being able to sit there if they say, no, it's never happened before, and give them that. Really? And it's like, you have 30 seconds to change your story before I say, but what about this example? Or you throw something in and say, did that not happen 5 years ago? Am I getting confused? And it really just says, don't mess with me. So interviewing people, I think you need to do a huge amount of research. It's like, how long in advance do you start prepping somebody? You need to do, like, I interview book authors. I never have time to read the book, but I will go through, I will dip into the book. I'll pull out the chapter headings that interest me. I'll read something on that and I'll say, you said it in one of your chapters that you do X. And from my point of view, the buzz is that somebody says at the end of it, it's such a pleasure to talk to somebody who's actually read the book, as opposed to the blurb that we sent out. But I would also have read things like, the other skill with interviewing, I think, is listening. It's not really in the questions. You've prepped the questions. You know what you think your audience will have an interest in. But I had a lady at one stage, Pauline Buick. I don't know if you know her. She'd be a very well-known artist in Ireland, and she's now probably in her 80s. And I was interviewing Pauline on the program, and I said to her, and I had done all my homework, and I knew that she'd been married for 50 odd years, and she'd come to fame probably 40 years ago with this series of exotic paintings she did from Bali or somewhere. And I said to her as part of the interview, and you're married to Pat or whatever for the last 50 years? She said, yes, and I've had 2 affairs, one in Greece in 19 whatever, and one in such and such a place. And I said to her, fascinating. And I didn't even ask you about them. So why are you telling me about your affairs? And she said, oh, because I reckon if I say it, you won't be able to say and tell me about the affairs you had. I said, I didn't even know. And she said, I live my life like this. I believe in being very open about everything that happened to me. And it means that nobody can ever spring a surprise on me. And I thought it was fascinating. I figure she had probably been ambushed by somebody at some stage. And her defense for all time in the future was, I'm going to tell you everything that I think you can find out about me so that you can't comment on it. But the other example that springs to came in to be interviewed. And I said to her, look, I'm just going to start by asking you about your childhood, because you've traveled the world. You've lived in 15 different countries or something by the time you were 20. It's fascinating. And she said, I won't talk about my childhood. And if you're interviewing somebody, they never set the agenda, ever. You always set the agenda. And I said, no, sorry, you've agreed to give an interview and I want to know about your childhood. And she said, well, I'm not prepared to talk about it. And I said, well, you better come up with something, because I'm going to ask you. So you can sit there and look like an idiot if you want to and say nothing. And I'll say, you're absolutely stunned. What's going on? And she said, I'm not going to talk about my childhood because my mother and father had a horrible relationship. My father moved every 6 months or 8 months as often as he could so that he could disrupt my mother every time she made a friend. And it was horrible. And eventually they got divorced. And I said, excellent. I don't give a damn about any of that. So you need to say, you moved a lot. You need to figure out a form of words that says, I've lived in Africa. I've lived in the States. I've lived in wherever. It covers it. I don't intend to dig into your parents' marriage, but I don't intend to start when you were 22, because anybody listening to the program would say, well, what happened before then? Because now you haven't got the context. And finally, if you're interviewing somebody, never give them the questions. Like, treat them with absolute arrogance, the way that journalists would treat you on the other side. It's like, can I have the questions? No. Do you want to do the interview? The interview is about your book, or the interview is about the press release you sent in. If you don't want to do the interview, don't do the interview. If you want to do the interview, then you're the one who's looking for publicity, and I'll ask you anything I feel like. And you, 99% of the time, you stick to the information that's sent in anyway. But if you give somebody the questions, they prep the answers, and it's never a good interview.
Interesting. And that's something people are going to be prepared for.
Are we doing on time? People, I'm going to have to leave you in about 5 minutes. I'm really sorry. Have we anything else?
Well, you know, we had 2 other questions that were in the chat.
Okay, flash through the other 2.
So I'll just let you know what they both are. And if we can't address both of them, then maybe we could do one of those, or actually 3 more. So, because I feel like a couple of these might be able to be things that we could maybe address after the fact. So one of them was about measuring, how do you measure data and reach in communications? Another one was good resources, like for external resources for training, for if you're low on budget. So those might be kind of some links or something afterwards. And then the last part is about what are the essential components of pre-planning for crisis communication, which I think really gets at the heart of some of the things you've been chatting about here today.
Okay, so measuring data and good resources, I agree with you. I'll share some links with you afterwards. Pre-planning for a crisis, because crisis strikes so fast, you have to have as much done in advance as you possibly can. So effectively, you try to figure out where your crisis is coming from. Everybody has a crisis that's going to happen, absolutely guaranteed. And you're trying to plan for all the variables. So if you were an airline, you would look at things like, obviously, hijack is the first thing that everybody thinks of, but you could have a pilot who died. You could have a passenger who dies on the plane. You could have somebody who lands somewhere and a bomb explodes. There's 1,000,001 different things. So what you're trying to do is sketch out the scenario. So in your case, none of them are good, because crisis is never good. It's always about something that you really much prefer not to be talking about. So your crisis is going to be money. It's going to be sexual misconduct. It's going to be, what are the 2 that are the toughest to handle? What else are you likely to face? But you would literally work out each of those. And then you would say, fine, so in this area, so what is our answer? So if somebody has been accused of abusing a child years ago, what's the answer? So what's the position that we take every time? What's the quote that we offer? What do we instantly start to move out there? So you have a store of material that's available to issue always. So every crisis you begin by saying, here's information about the parish, here's how many people are involved in the parish, here's how many priests have served in the parish, here's how long the parish has been in existence, here's how much money it takes in, here's how many masses. It fills space. People now feel that you're giving them something that they can use while they're waiting for an answer. Your press release has to come out as fast as possible and really should only have a gap. It should have been legaled in advance. Legal people will tell you that you can never say you're sorry. And it's a standard legal thing. Don't say you're sorry, because if you say you're sorry, you admit liability, you get sued, it'll cost you a fortune, you know, the whole parish will be down in the toilet. And your answer has to be in advance. Your skill is to find me a form of words that says I'm sorry, that doesn't say sorry and get me sued, because that's why we're paying you people. So find it. And saying, if you think about it, if you try to say to somebody, I'm sorry, it's a natural reaction. Something happens and you want to say, oh God, I'm awful sorry. So instead of saying I'm awful sorry, do you say something like, this is an appalling tragedy and it should never have happened. No parent should be facing this kind of news. No parish should be faced with this news. Should have to answer these allegations. There's 1,000,001 ways that you can actually reach out and say, I am as appalled, or we are as appalled as you are, and we're trying to get to the bottom of this situation, without saying I'm sorry and please sue me. And that's one of the key things. You need it legal in advance, because you're going to have to send it in writing afterwards, and the writing is what will be really carefully analysed. That's where your media prep comes in big time. You say what you say and then you walk somebody back out again. So you march out your bishop, whether it's sexual or financial or whatever, you march them out and say, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell people in advance, like if I'm handling a crisis, I'll walk into a press conference and say, good morning, good afternoon, I am making so-and-so available to you. They're going to read a statement to you. Does everybody have cameras at the ready? Are all microphones ready? We're only reading the statement once. There will be no questions afterwards. Is everybody in a position to take questions? Are you ready? In that case, we issue the statement. And somebody reads the statement. So you have a face. You have somebody who's senior saying, this is what happened. This is what we're doing. This is the up-to-date situation. And then you find a way. You have somebody probably to take them out a different door than the door they came in, because you don't want that look of people saying, I just want to ask you these questions. And you immediately resume the podium and say, ladies and gentlemen, let me thank you for attending. Let me encourage you to actually spread this information as widely as you can. I'm happy to take any additional questions. I want to thank so-and-so for issuing that statement for you. I can tell you that we will have a press conference on the hour, every hour, on the half hour, every hour. I'm guaranteeing you that whether anything happens or not, I will be at this podium, or I will be issuing by email every hour on the half hour that there are no updates, or this is the latest update. I will keep you in touch. So you try to gain control of it as much as you possibly can. But you have a store of statements that you've already pre-issued, positions that you're comfortable to take, that won't get you into trouble. Won't get you into trouble as in that can't whip back around and bite you. Not that somebody doesn't approve of, but that you can't actually have somebody say, but didn't this happen before? Or this wasn't the position you took previously when, and you're dead in the water. So you need to put a lot of prep into it. You have visuals that you can issue, you have video footage that you can issue, because you're going to be countering the visuals and the video footage on the other side. And it's exactly the same with money. This is how much money, this is how many treasurers we've had, this is how many people have been responsible. These are the good people who have given us money. And it's exactly the same thing. It's appalling that anybody would think that money would go missing in this way. And usually when money goes missing, and money has been going missing for a while as a general rule. So it isn't that somebody dipped their hand in their pocket and took out 100 grand. It's that they've been eking out a grand here, 2 grand there, 3 grand there. And your statement really has to say, in effect, we obviously didn't have the procedures in place to identify this, and that was our mistake. But you can't say we were too trusting, because you've now libeled the person who took all your money. Legal is great fun. It's really, if you see it as a game and you come in early and say, how do you protect me? Because that's what you get paid for. And I want to be able to make it clear that this is not common practice, or that, like, this is the position I want you to agree a wording on, and don't go formal. And don't end up speaking what a lawyer would write, because nobody will believe you. You've no credibility. They have to say it. If you want a lawyer to write you a statement, you just pay them to write you the statement on the spot. And my attitude would be, look, we can pay you the $50 for that or something, and you can issue it. That's monkey stuff. Anybody can do that. What I want is somebody who can cleverly help me craft a statement that doesn't get us into legal trouble, but that ends up with people saying, yeah, but he was very cut up about it, or she was very upset about it, or in fairness now, like, last piece, I really have to go. Last piece. When we trained the police, the Garda's chiefs and supers, one of the things we did at one stage was to do a piece about somebody dying, I don't know, and saying to somebody that you're very sorry. No, I had used it as an example. It was something that they got wrong, and someone said, that's marvelous, so that's the formula we use every time. So this is the formula of words, and we always do it. And it's like going to a funeral. Some people go to a funeral and they stay at the back of the church, and they sign the book, and they wouldn't dream of going beyond the back of the church because they hate funerals, but they just want to be there for you. They're not going to say a word. And months afterwards, you see their name and go, God, wasn't that very decent of them? They attended the funeral, but you didn't see them. Other people will march up like the politicians. I want everybody to know I'm here because I do all the funerals in the parish, and this is very important, and this is votes for me or whatever. It works that way in Ireland anyway. And then there are people who will shake your hand, and in that really embarrassed, sorry for your loss, and keep going. And there are people who walk up to you and go, oh, I'm so sorry. And everybody has a different style. What you're trying to do is make sure in a crisis that whatever the style of the individual you're responsible for, their style comes across. So everybody knows that it's exactly how you would expect them to react. So whether you like it or not, you know that your key spokesperson is going to go out there and go, oh, Mary, instantly. Don't stop them doing it. That's what they do. Just be careful about what they say after, oh, Mary. Folks, I really have to run. I'm really sorry. Will you send me on any extra questions? I did far too much talking and you did far too little talking. So we're going to have to try and do this again. Do you know what we could do? If everybody's on LinkedIn, can we all link in? Can we connect on LinkedIn? Oh, groovy. Is Thomas the only man in the group? I know we have Thomas and James. Have we just got 2 men with us? What did you do to all the men? Are there more women than men in communications in the church?
No, it's just in the church in general. Like if you look at the numbers, I mean, okay. We have a lot of female staff, not like throughout, but I think I'm just in general.
Okay, so cheers.
Yes, so thank you for joining us, Ellen.
Reflects the church. Okay, I got you. James and Thomas, you're equally very welcome to join me on LinkedIn, okay? Sorry for running. Thanks, folks.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.
And Nicole, thanks for the invitation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All the best. Bye-bye.